Good morning. Today is Friday, November 4th, November 4th, 2022. This is the Urban Hope Refuge Morning Devotions. We are continuing our reading today from the 2022 Daily Bible Reading Guide published by the American Bible Society. For the month of November, we are reading under the theme God's renewing word of thankfulness and praise. Today, we are reading from Ezra chapter 6, verses 1 through 12. And I forgot to move my cup. Always like my butterfly visible. Ezra chapter 6, verses 1 through 12. And we're reading from the New International Version. Sub-theme: the decree of Darius. Verse 1. King Darius then issued an order, and they searched in the archives stored in the treasury of Babylon. A scroll was found in the citadel of Ecbatana in the province of Media, and this was written on it. Memorandum: in the first year of King Cyrus, the king issued a decree concerning the temple of God in Jerusalem. Let the temple be rebuilt as a place to present sacrifices, and let its foundations be laid. It is to be 60 cubits high and 60 cubits wide, with 3 courses of large stones and 1 of timbers. The cost are to be paid by the royal treasury. Also, the gold and silver articles of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar took from the temple in Jerusalem and brought to Babylon, are to be returned to their places in the temple in Jerusalem. They are to be deposited in the house of God. Now then, Tataniah, governor of Trans-Euphrates and Shethar-Bozenah, and you other officials of that province, stay away from there. Do not interfere with the work on this temple of God. Let the governor of the Jews and the Jewish leaders or Jewish elders rebuild this house of God on its site. Moreover, I hereby decree what you are to do for these elders of the Jews in the construction of this house of God. Their expenses are to be fully paid out of the royal treasury from the revenues of Trans-Euphrates, so that the work will not stop. Whatever is needed: young bulls, rams, male lambs for burnt offerings to the God of heaven, and wheat, salt, wine, and olive oil, as requested by the priest in Jerusalem, must be given them daily without fail, so that they may offer sacrifices pleasing to the God of heaven and pray for the well-being of the king and his sons. Furthermore, I declare that if anyone defies this edict, a beam is to be pulled from their house, and they are to be impaled on it. And for this crime, their house is to be made a pile of rubble. May God, who has caused his name to dwell there, overthrow any king or people who lifts a hand to change this decree or to destroy this temple in Jerusalem. I, Darius, have declared it. Let it be carried out with diligence. Wow. This concludes our reading for today of Ezra chapter 6, verses 1 through 12. The reason I said, wow, is because nobody can do what God can do. These are pagan kings that were offering this king that was offering this decree did not serve the true and living God. I am just so taken by the fact of what and how God navigates and moves on behalf of his people. Well, let me get to what I had planned to say today, but that just kind of struck me in my spirit, how God can do what he wills to do. So the people of God, if you will remember from yesterday's reading, had stopped working on the temple, and it had been about 16 years that they had stopped working because of the situation of challenge. But finally, they had gotten started on the project again of rebuilding the temple. And they were doing what God wanted them to do. They were doing what God's prophets had told them to do. And the thing about it is, as I just read in our scripture today, they had permission from the governing authorities to do this project. In fact, King Cyrus had allowed them to return from exile from Babylon back to Jerusalem precisely for this reason, and that was to rebuild the temple. And yet, as soon as they got going again, they ran into some serious bureaucratic roadblocks. We read that yesterday, that the local governor was suspicious, and he immediately sent off a letter to the current king, King Darius, to try to put a stop to their efforts. They just couldn't seem to get a break. But think about it. Can you relate those folks in their frustration, the Israelites, while they were waiting for the approval to do what God had already told them to do? Many of us are confronted with that today. There are things that God has given to our hands to do that we know without a doubt that it is God ordained. And there are so many roadblocks to keep us from accomplishing the will that God has for us. Because He said in His word, I know the plans that I have for you. So then the enemy steps in to block it. Well, verses 1 and 2, oh, I so wish I had time to walk through these verses so that you can see what and how God carries out His will in the life of His people. God cared about the construction of the temple. So the Jews did not have to stop the work on the temple while they waited for Darius's reply. And that is in what we read yesterday, Ezra 5 and 5. How do you feel about waiting? Darius did what the officers had suggested. So he ordered a search of the records, and they found the right records. Now, they didn't find them in Babylon where they thought that they would, but they were in another province, Abatana, was another city where the king had a palace, and that's where the records were. But the bottom line is they found the records. And Ezra copied the record of Cyrus that Cyrus had commanded when he was king. Ezra copied them, and the record showed that the Jews had spoken the truth. And so Cyrus ordered the Jews to build the house of God again. And you notice that as I was reading, how profoundly throughout the scripture it kept referring to the house of God, the house of God. Now, this king did not believe in the God of earth and heaven, the true and living God. He didn't even believe in him. But listen, I think he knew a lot about this God of earth and heaven. And that was why he took the position, a part of the reason why he took the position that he did, because he had seen the power of God in operation. He had seen that. And it is for that reason that he supported what had already been decreed. And he went a step further than that. He not only decreed that the work be done, but he said the government is going to pay for it. It can't get better than that. He even said, as I stated, that he would pay the cost. He also told the Jews that when all of the gold and silver objects that were taken from the temple, original temple in Jerusalem, all of that was to be taken back to the temple at Jerusalem. If you remember this is so good. If you remember in our reading yesterday, that the officials that came and stopped the work, they said they have large stones and they have all this good and expensive wood that they're using. But listen, Cyrus had actually ordered the Jews to build the temple with those large stones. I read it to you today, everything that he had told them to do. And they were doing it. But then, listen at this. He said to them, I want you all, my people, to help them. But at a certain point, I want you to back off. And I want them to do the work. But I'm supplying all of the money that I need. And you know what he told them? He said, No matter what they need on a daily basis, give it to them. Even the sacrifices that they want to make to God on their schedule of how they worship God, give it to them. Listen, God does and will do the very same thing for us today. God can use anybody and anything that He desires to carry out His will in our lives. We ought to be so thankful, not just at Thanksgiving, but every day of our life, thankful to the God of earth and heaven. Oh, I wish I could continue on, but I'm just going to say to you, it's Friday. Pray your way through the day, walk with the King, and be a blessing.